ecological succession is the study of how a community changes over time. And if you look at patterns in these changes, you can see that all communities follow the same type of pattern change. So, succession in ecosystems is essentially the study of how one species replaces another. And over time, the mixture of species and habitat availability in a particular area is going to change. And this is because different species require different set of nutrients, different types of habitats. It all depends on what requirements are there. Generally, the plant life in an ecosystem is going to be the driving factor for this change. And we see some common patterns in the plant life, and therefore we can also assume that there are going to be common patterns in the animal life that are utilizing those plants as a food and habitat source. So these communities are going to change. Species are going to replace one another until one of two things happen. One, a climax community can be reached. This is sort of the end state of ecological succession. In a climax community, you essentially have a mature forest with permanent trees. You may have heard the term old growth forest at some point. If you haven't, that's okay. An old growth forest is really just a forest that has lots of very mature, very old trees. And so if we think of succession in a community as a process, this would sort of be the end state of the process, this stable, essentially permanent climax community. So species are going to replace one another until we get to that climax community, or until we get to a disturbance, something like a forest fire, something that removes some of those species, some of that plant life, some of the animal life from a particular area. Now, small-scale disturbances are going to be happening all the time. If a tree falls down in a forest, that's a small-scale disturbance. We have a really small forest fire. That's a small-scale disturbance. Large-scale disturbances are going to be less common. And some communities are actually adapted to large-scale disturbances. For example, many pine trees, prairies, lots of different environments are actually fire adapted, meaning that those communities have evolved to deal with specific types of disturbances, and they're actually healthy for the environment because it can usher in those species changes towards that climax community. So we first get this idea of the climax community from someone named Frederick Clements. And Frederick Clements basically said that succession is working towards this end point that is a climax community. Now, not all communities are going to reach that climax community in a linear fashion, and that's because disturbances, especially large-scale or drastic disturbances, can actually set communities back to an earlier succession stage. And when that happens, they basically start over either from the beginning or from some point in the middle that's just a little farther back from where they were. And then they continue to change towards that ecological climax community. But what species are present is actually really important in the progression towards that climax community, because each species in that community is going to make the environment a little bit different. It's going to provide a new habitat or a new resource, a new interaction that's going to push that community a little farther towards that climax. So succession can be broadly categorized into sort of two types of succession. Primary succession, this is where new habitats are colonized. Now, primary succession doesn't you essentially have rock or dirt and nothing else. So an example of this would be on the Hawaiian Islands. When we have lava flows. And after that lava hardens, eventually that lava starts to break down into smaller rocks and then into really fertile soil. And as that happens, new plants can colonize it. We might start to see animals living in it. Secondary succession happens when ecosystems are disrupted, but they're not taken all the way back to bedrock, or they are a community that is currently established and a disturbance has basically not wiped it clean. So secondary succession can happen to a variety of different levels, but as long as we're not going back to bedrock, back to soil with no plants, no animals that are able to live there, there's going to be some level of secondary succession. So the general pattern of succession is that a pioneer species initially colonizes those primary species are going to be plant species that can get their roots down into that soil and start building habitats for animals and fungi to follow. So those intermediate species are really going to start to define what later species are going to be present. So for example, if we've got these Hawaiian Islands with the lava flows, maybe that lava is starting to crack, and maybe a bird drops a seed as it's flying over, and now we have a plant. And maybe another bird drops another seed, and now we have a couple of plants, and then grasses start to move in. Those later species after the pioneer species are the intermediate species, the ones that sort of start to establish more habitats, more resources for organisms. And then those intermediate species are going to be replaced by the stable climax community species. If you were watching this in class, I would show a video on Mount St. Helens ecological system. It talks about what happens when you have a big ecological disturbance, such as the eruption of Mount St. Helens in the early 1980s. I'm not going to show it here, but this video is linked in Brightspace, so you can go find it under chapter 44. So here is an example of what might happen during primary succession. So this is just kind of a general representation. It's going to be a little bit different depending on what type of environment you are in and what types of trees happen to be the climax trees in that community. So here we have a climax community of oak and hickory. This would be representative of Illinois and the Midwest. So basically a deciduous environment. And so we can think of what might happen in Illinois if we were all the way back at bare rock. So remember that primary succession is when we are at bare rock and essentially starting from scratch or starting over from scratch. Secondary succession would be a disturbance that takes any one of these communities back to an earlier community. So primary succession is bare rocks. Organisms start to colonize those rocks. Very commonly we see lichens as early colonizers. And this is because lichens have the ability to break down rocks and turn them into fertile soil. So as lichens grow on rocks, they break them down into sort of a powdery soil that then our small plants can colonize. Once those plants start cycling nutrients in the environment, bringing energy in to that environment, it's going to make it more hospitable for other pioneer species. So early pioneer species tend to include small start to